I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we'll be having today. And as a quick run through, I'll be introducing our participants before passing it on to MENA Kareem, our moderator. We'll reserve some time at the end for the audience Q&A, so please feel free to write out the questions that come up to you in the chat. This topic feels as timely as it is heavy today in the MENA region, particularly for Palestine and Sudan. In many ways, I think literature and poetry can widen our apertures and shift the focus onto perspectives that are often missed within the narrow scope of policy, development, and international relations. So with that in mind, I really look forward to listening to and learning from the four incredible poets that are with us today. So I'll start by introducing Mosab Abu Toha, a Palestinian poet from Gaza who has published poems and essays in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Washington Post, The Nation, The New York Review of Books, and The Atlantic, amongst others. His debut poetry books, Things You May Find Hidden in My Ear, was published by City Lights and was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award and won an American Book Award, a Walcott Poetry Prize, and a Palestine Book Award. Safia Elhillo is a Sudanese poet by way of Washington, D.C. She is the author of The January Children, which received the Silverman First Book Prize for African Poets and an Arab American Book Award. She wrote the national bestseller, Girls That Never Die, and the novel and verse Home Is Not a Country, which was longlisted for the National Book Award and received a Coretta Scott King Book Award author honor. Her second novel in verse, Bright Red Fruit, just came out this year. Congratulations. Zeina Beck is a Lebanese poet. Her third poetry collection, Oh, won the 2023 Arab American Book Award for Poetry and was named a Best Book 2022 by LitHub and the New York Public Library. Her poetry has been featured on the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day and has appeared in The Atlantic, The Nation, The New York Times, Poetry Magazine, and elsewhere. Her poem Maqam won Poetry Magazine's 2017 Frederick Brock Prize. Zeina has invented a bilingual poetic form called the duet, in which Arabic and English exist both independently and in conversation with each other. And she's the co-creator and co-host of Maqsuda, a podcast in Arabic about Arabic poetry. And finally, MENA Kareem is also with us, who is an assistant professor of Arabic and comparative literature at Washington University in St. Louis. Her research and teaching interests focus on literary cultures of race and ethnicity in the global South, with an emphasis on Afro-Asian encounters in the Arabian Peninsula/Persian Gulf. Her articles have appeared in Arabian Humanities, Jadaliya, Arab Studies Journal, the Los Angeles Review of Books, The Common, and others. She's an editor of the Massachusetts Review and a member of the West Asian Forum Executive Committee of the Modern Languages Association. In addition to her scholarly work, Dr. Kareem is the author of 3 poetry collections and the translator of a number of works. Her poetry appears in Poetry, Poetry Northwest, Michigan Quarterly, Poetry London, Modern Poetry and Translation, amongst other. So thank you again all for joining us. I really look forward to this, and I'll pass it to you, Mona.
Thank you, Zeina. Hello to the audience. Good afternoon, good morning, according to your time zone. Thank you for joining us. And I welcome the panelists. Thanks to the MENA Club and the Africa Club for making this possible. Personally, it allowed me time to sit with the work of the 3 panelists, and I'm excited to do with this. I want to start with Mosab and specifically to start with your essays. You know, we have read you as a poet first, and your poems, Palestine and especially Gaza is often present. In the past 6 months, you have turned to writing essays in the chronicle form. You published 3 essays in the New Yorker that annotate this 6 months long genocide, one in October, one in January, and one in February. The first registers for those who didn't read it, the first registers the personal loss, the disorientation of surviving while not seeing an end in sight. You write, the sentence really stuck with me. I'm being killed every day with my people, right? It stuck with me that death is a never-ending process. It highlights the routines of war. The second gives us with affect and horror, a detailed retelling of your experience of being kidnapped by the Israeli army. Alhamdulillah ala salamtek. And the third takes place in Cairo, where each act of eating, each sight of food, carries in it the echo of manufactured famine in Gaza and of memories around the table. So I'm asking really about this experience of writing as witnessing, especially that your testimonies, if we can call them so, in the essay form, are not taking place in the aftermath of the genocide, but really in the now of it.
Yeah, I think what makes this genocide even more horrible is that we in Gaza and Palestinians outside of Gaza and those who are showing solidarity with the Palestinian people and their plight under the Israeli occupation and the Israeli genocide are shouting out loud with the utmost, at the top of their lungs. We are being killed every day. We said that from day one, and we have been saying this even before this October 7th. We have been shouting, we have been crying, we have been weeping, we have been killed. I mean, for decades, but nothing changed. And writing while this is taking place even makes this more horrible, because I've been warning, through my essays, through my Facebook posts, and even many other Palestinians from Gaza and outside have been calling for an end for the Israeli massacres, for the Israeli siege on Gaza, which started in 2007 and before. So it's not something that the world discovered after it happened. It's been happening, and it's been exposed to the outside world, through writing, through videos, through reporting from Gaza. Even reporters, even correspondents of the news channels have been targeted. We have many examples. One of whom is Walid Dahdouh, who was targeted multiple times, and the last time he was injured and his cameraman was killed, Rami Abu Daqqa. So this act of witnessing is not something that we are sharing with the world after this ended, or after we found a way for us to sit at the table and write and take notes and start to remember. But it's something that's happening, and we know it's going to happen again. And this is one thing that made me very depressed. And in one of my last Instagram posts, I said, more people are dying, nothing is changing, this world is useless. So thank you for standing with us. Bye-bye. Because I've been posting about the same things. I've been saying many people are killed at the Kuwait roundabout. It's the roundabout in Gaza City where food trucks go from South Gaza to North Gaza, where hundreds of Palestinians who are being starved by the Israelis are waiting, for the food to come in. So they are killed. They have been killed one time, and then a second time, then a third time, and it's on the news, but nothing stopped. So last time it happened, I saw the news. I took a deep breath, and then. So it torments me to be witnessing this and writing about it, but unfortunately, nothing is changing. And as for writing essays, it's writing essays for me is like telling a story, or retelling the stories of the people around me. So it was easier for me to write essays than to write poetry, because if I'm going to write a poem, it would take a lot from me. It needs me to remember the story and put it on the page along with my feelings, which is not an easy act, to do, especially during a genocide.
Thank you, Mosab. I want to stay with this theme of witnessing, especially the relationship of the poet to to events of this enormity, right? And I think this is something I noticed across the work, across your work, the three of you. So my next question would be to Safia. I found this poem that you wrote, which begins, I don't know the title, but it begins with, "What are you, poet? Do you remember me?" Right? And I was wondering if you would mind reading it for people to hear, but also maybe also reflect about the speculative ways that you use poetry and being a poet to connect the nows of war and genocide to a future we can't bring ourselves to imagine. And I think, you know, you are someone in your work, like there is this attempt to retrieve the place that is Sudan, you know, always losing it and trying to retrieve it through memory, collective memory, sometimes through verse, through bilingual form, in many ways. So maybe through this poem, you can walk us, through this approach.
Thank you, Mona. So the poem is the tentative title. I'm pretty terrible with titles, to be honest. Is in memory of الطيب الكوغلي. الطيب حسب الرسول الكوغلي. My grandfather was a poet, Allah yarhamu, and he passed away a few months before the war. So when it rains, it pours. You know what I mean? So I'll start by reading the poem, and it opens with a quote from a poem that he loved very much, that he taught to me. So the quote is وطن النجوم أنا هنا حدك أتذكر من أنا, and that's by Ilya Abu Madi. Where are you, poet? Do you remember me, poet? The house is gone, and the war has eaten all our together places, all your books and papers. I will never be glad that you are gone, but I am grateful you didn't have to see this. Don't come back, poet. The world is crueler than you left it, dark with the colors of blood. I miss you, poet. I miss our country, its clay and volcanic rock, its car radios, city of smoke and paint. I want you back and the war gone, and here instead is the cruel opposite. Our gone homeland, the stars, long dead by the time anyone looks up. There are bullets in your bookshelves, poet, broken dishes and windows, our family fleeing into the desert. Don't come back. There are horrors I have no language for, numbers larger than my mind can hold, and it feels like the end of the world. I don't know how else to put it. The war makes me a bad poet. The war makes me a bad friend, bad daughter, busy with the company of the dead over the living. I ask my questions to the stars, to the gone, dead for years and with me still. Maybe it's evidence that I still hope, that I have only questions for our country. When will I see you again? What remains? Not yet if, not yet nothing. Maybe I'll still see you there, in our homeland, its stars, and maybe you'll both remember me. So in this moment, I feel like my role as a poet has primarily concentrated into a noise-making project. I just, I'm trying to make whatever noise I can as insistently as I can, particularly because you may have noticed that oftentimes when the war in Sudan is brought up these days, it's usually described as the forgotten war. A lot of very, respected media outlets, they love using that phrase, Sudan's forgotten war, the forgotten war in Sudan, which is funny to me because I haven't forgotten. I don't know anyone who has forgotten. And so that feels like kind of an intentional bit of language meant to kind of put us in our place. And so the project I feel compelled by here, more so than kind of what I would usually reach for in times like this, of doing kind of imaginative world building and what would a free, peaceful Sudan under civilian rule look like? What could be possible for us? That, sure, but the short-term future that I am trying to work towards in the company of so many others is to make it so that no one has the luxury of forgetting. I want to be annoying. I want to be insistent. I want to be the little Sudanese mosquito in every space I'm in, because I think forgotten is, among other things, a lazy and passive term, when the word that is actually being deployed here is ignored. It's Sudan's ignored war. And, you know, it's we're an African country. And in the 68 years since independence, literally every generation of my family has known war. And so it tends to be treated like it's the natural order of things when Sudan is at war, when there's conflict. If anything, I am trying to do my part in record keeping, and B, in trying to articulate in whatever ways I can that this is not natural for anyone. This is unnatural. This is deeply not the natural order of things for anyone. And but I also interrogate in myself the ways that I try to harness that attention, you know? So people are not thinking about Sudan, sure. So what are my moves? Post a beautifully lit photograph of the pyramids. You know what I mean? To be like, isn't it so sad that we are the cradle of civilization? Look at these beautiful pyramids, these beautiful gardens. Isn't it so sad now that in a place with such beauty, such atrocities are happening? As if we didn't have pyramids or gardens or whatever, the atrocities would be less atrocious. And so it is a little bit like I have 35 apps running in here at all times, because I think a lot about what the poet Rasha Abdel Hadi said, whatever sand you can throw on the gears of genocide, do it now. So that's, you know, project number one, throw sand on the gears of genocide, make whatever noise I can, do whatever language I can, try to crowd out the kind of frustrating passive language that is being supplied externally for this moment with some language of my own, but also trying to interrogate what translation work I am making myself responsible for, what palatability work I'm trying to make myself responsible for, because again, who is it that I'm trying to get to care? You know what I mean? Sudanese people already care. No one Sudanese that I know has forgotten or ignored the situation. And so unfortunately, I often find myself in the position of being like, how do I get someone who doesn't already care to care? And so I'm noticing in myself little moves to be like, hey, my grandfather was a poet. And when the war started, they had to move his bookshelves in front of the windows because bullets were coming into the house. Isn't that sad to picture a poet's books being shot? So then I'm like, okay, now we can get people who care about poetry who might not care about Sudanese people to be like, oh, books, they shot the books. So it's deeply frustrating work, obviously. And also I'm doing what I can, as imperfect and frustrating as it may be, as occasionally humiliating as it may be. I don't necessarily have the luxury of being like, oh, this is embarrassing, I shan't. You know what I mean? It's embarrassing and I shall. I don't know.
Thank you, Safia. I mean, this detail about the books, also in Mosab's essay, I really want to return to it, but I really recognize, or it really resonates with me what you're saying about this constant failure, right? Like every day, you know, whatever we come up with, we just like it's with a failure. But at the same time, it's been a humbling experience to think, let me not center my ego. This is not, you know, like this is not about me, and it's okay to fail because what is the other option? And it's also, there is a particular thing for us who live in the West, you know, of like finding ourselves engaging in the humanization discourse while rejecting it, you know, but yeah, so it's a roller coaster in that way. But yeah, thanks for sharing this with us. I want to ask Zeina, I noticed, again, I'm staying with the same theme, and I also want to emphasize or highlight the fact that our different locations and how we're witnessing this, how we're responding to this, and even the fact that we all share a main medium that is poetry. So I noticed since October you have published 2 sonnets. I know you've been working on many others. I would like you to read one of them of your choice. But for those who haven't read the poems, I wanted to tell them about the first one, titled Savage Sonnet. I felt in that poem as if the past, the present, and future have collapsed into one. We see also that the land is speaking, and that memory is inherent in a way, salvaged always, even if tongues fail, even if discourse fails, right? While in few small details, even though it's in the passive voice, I see the line, I noose water my nightmares, I blue song. When I say grief, I mean rage, I mean strong, our family trees, right? This moving between the I and we, finally, like the speaker emerges. But also in this motion, I noticed that the poem ends from where it began, and that that resonated with me in the sense of, like, this repetition that we are captive to. But somehow some of it salvages us in a way. So can you tell us about your choice of the sonnet in this moment, but also your use of the rhetorical questions, the presence of the news spilling? I like this description of the spilling, like even if you protect yourself, it's still, invasive. So all these motions that drive these sonnets.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you, MENA Club, and hi, Mosab and Safia. And thank you for engaging so deeply with our work. I was a little bit freaked out when I saw like language, poetry, and I'm like, oh my God, we have to solve shit now. I can't solve shit. And then Mona comes in with her brilliance and just kind of dives into stuff. Yeah, the news spills. In another sonnet, I say, I'm trying to write you a love song, but the news overspills as I boil coffee. Like, this is literally what we're constantly feeling. The sonnet form that you're describing is also a palindrome, just, for those who might not have read them, so that I write the sonnet one way and then I flip it on itself and write it from bottom to top again. It's a way to resist singular meaning or singular narratives. And it preceded the work that I've been doing with the sonnet palindromes precedes the genocide. And I think it's a direct result of me moving to the US about 2 years ago. I lived most of my life in the Arab world. And when I moved here, I felt this complete kind of dissonance between where my body was and where my mind was. My body was in California and my brain was literally you wake up and you're like, where am I, right? And you're still in that time zone, you're still texting those friends, you're still listening to, and I had to make a conscious decision at some point, like, Zeina, you have to start actually existing where you exist, where you live physically. Not to say that when I was in the Arab world, I felt such a great sense of belonging all the time. Like, no, obviously not. But, this is the deepest rift that I felt so far. And I think I was quiet for about 1.5 years, like did not put words on the page. And when I did write, I wrote in Arabic. And I think that was like almost a spite to the environment. Like, I will write in Arabic now, But then the sonnets started coming. And I think that the palindrome format of the sonnet, the flipping of meaning and the reversal of meaning and the reversal of narrative and allowing for contradictions is really my way of dealing with this, like me looking in several directions at the same time. and being several places at the same time, right? And not settling, and I use the word settle very intently. Settle, it's such a, I don't like this word, settling for one meaning. And, you know, state, we use language, right? We use language, but so does the state. So does organized religion. So you know, and I feel that the language of those kind of entities or institutions is always about one meaning. This is it. That's what, you know, that like that's the propaganda. Whereas poetic language tries as much as possible to resist and kind of disturb this, right? And I remember when I first moved here, I had a WhatsApp conversation with you, Mona, where you said something very beautiful, which is like, I guess exile is, I'm terribly paraphrasing you now, but you said something along the line of, I guess exile is kind of lucky for the poet, because the poet kind of somehow thrives in this exile, you know, to quote Edward Said's reflections on exile, you know, he says that the exile is always aware of more than one reality, of more than one language, and there's like this contrapuntal consciousness going on. So there's that. There's the resisting of singular meaning, but there's also, I feel, maybe, I don't know, maybe the sonnet is it's a form, right? It's a box. Terence Hayes describes it as like part prison, part panic closet, part music box, part meat grinder. So there's a violence to the sonnet, but there's also the possibility of song. It literally means little song, right? Sonnet. And so maybe also like I found myself drawn to this kind of controlled form because everything else around me felt like it was collapsing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. Do you mind reading one of the songs?
I'm gonna read the new one, and this is I'm gonna read it because it's a sonnet that reflects on language itself, and this is a panel, I guess, on language somehow. This is a spring sonnet. Our dead are more alive than they're living. I said to my friend and might have meant it. Meanwhile, the maple blooms and the marriage withers, goes quiet. I stare at the news of the dead, of the blood and the flower. I say lost love, but I mean history. I don't know what I mean by more alive. I weep in the car, the bathroom, the bed. I'm thinking of the violence of language. Settle. Lovers use words to escape fear, to stay. Oppressors use words to possess. I think I'm trying to understand life. No, I think I'm trying to understand endings. It's almost April again. What's almost? It's almost April again. What's almost? No. I'm trying to understand endings, I think. I'm trying to understand life, to stay. Oppressors use words to possess, settle. Lovers use words to escape fear. I'm thinking of the violence of language. I weep in the car, the bathroom, the bed. I don't know what I mean by more. Alive, I say, lost, love. But I mean history of the dead, of the blood. And the flower withers, goes quiet. I stare at the news. Meanwhile, the maple blooms. And the marriage? I said to my friend and might have meant it, our dead are more alive than they're living.
Thank you, Zeina. I actually want to return to you later about like this experience of like being fresh in exile because different ways to define exile, but I also feel like one thing that exile is distinct for is like this constant urge to resurrect yourself. And every year or two you have whole new formulations about what is exile.
Yeah.
What are you gonna do about it, or how are you gonna live through it? But I want to return to Safia, and we're really staying in similar themes, and I love that there's like this persistent engagement that you all have around certain themes. So I read this short piece you wrote titled Before. It's let's say like prose or essayistic, right? And it was in the blog, it was in the form of a blog post, and it's about visiting Sudan just 2 months before the war broke out. And to be honest, I was reminded of Etheridge Knight's idea of ancestry, and I was like, should we read it? But there isn't time. But I was really hunted by this feeling of what it's like to look back at beautiful memories, of a return visit, and that it's like it's this visit that you await for, that you think is impossible, and then there's this like gap in time that makes it possible. And then you're looking back at that beauty, but through the tainted light of a tragedy that followed. And this tragedy is happening right now. So it's heartbreaking, right? To like be able to look at that beautiful memory and not be able to hold it fully, I guess. So in the piece, I saw place, I saw people, I saw poetry. You talk about your lineage and the connection between lineage and poetry, but I also saw how the place disappeared in the second half of the article, intentionally, I guess also. So the place is now locked away, but the people and voice continue to float. So I wanted to ask you to tell us about this type of looking at the past through the broken mirrors of memory, as Salman Rushdie calls them.
Yeah, thank you, Mona, for that very thoughtful reading of my little blog post. I have been pretty frustrated with myself in the past year or so because of this kind of tick I have as a writer, which is that so often when I would sit down to write about Sudan, I would write about it in the present tense, in the past tense, and as if it were already gone, irretrievably gone, and sort of from a posture of grief. And, this is in part because of my lifelong work of trying to undo my toxic nostalgia. But I really, I missed a real opportunity, because the fact of the matter is, outside of my poems in which Sudan appeared in past tense as an absence, I, in my real life, had like a real and regular present day, regular relationship to Sudan. It was a place I went to. It was a place I had a real life. I like ran errands and did bureaucracy and hung out, and and that I wasn't paying attention at the time. I thought, the war, I think, came as a surprise to all of us, obviously, but I think I thought of all of the ruptures in my people and my family's history as being in past tense. And so I had the luxury of, I don't know, of sort of taking for granted my present tense and attending instead to the ruptures that had happened in the past. And so in my poems, there was no poem about being in Sudan, doing regular shit, riding around in a car, listening to a CD. You know what I mean? And now that the goneness feels a little more like a present reality. I'm so frustrated at myself, especially if oftentimes what I'm trying to do with my work is primarily make a record for myself about the things I've experienced and felt and seen. And I hadn't quite gotten to my present day Sudan in my record keeping work. And so it feels like double the loss. So it's, yeah, I spent a lot of time, one of the title of the piece that you mentioned, Muna, before comes from this meditation on before as in the past versus before being right in front of me to behold. And in general, my bad habit as a writer is to attend to the before behind me and not the before me. And now the before me so quickly, before I had a chance to do anything about it, is now behind me, and ahead of me is uncertain now for the first time, truly. One of the main things that I've been obsessing over, because, the fact of war is so big and abstract almost, that I can kind of almost have, I can only have real feelings about kind of minutia at a time, because my like body and my psyche can't quite absorb the reality of the magnitude of war. And so I find myself hyper fixating on little things like, I was there in February 2023. I was reading a book, and I didn't have space in my bag for the book. And so I just left it. I was like, I'll finish it next time, I left a dress that I really like, because I was like, it makes more sense for my life here than it does for my life in LA. But I'll wear it next time. And so the ease and just the confidence with which I was saying next time, with which I was making plans, as if I don't know better. You know what I mean? The fact that just in an instant was gone and stayed gone. It's been almost a year of the war now. I can't stop thinking about little things like that. And so I think, I don't know, this is almost a frivolous conclusion to draw here, but I think it's making me grow up as a poet, because so much of my obsession with the before and the gone and the whatever was about things that had been lost to other people, and a loss that I inherited after the fact, instead of a real-time loss that I experienced personally as an adult. And now that I'm trying to even articulate that, to even begin to think to write about it, the scale has fundamentally changed of the images and the details that I was thinking about. The scale before used to be, I lost a world, I lost a country, and now I'm like, I lost a book, I lost a blue dress, but it's just reorienting the tense in which I think has been a deeply disorienting and deeply painful process. And yeah, like, obviously I'm like mad at the state and at Sudanese armed forces, at the RSF. And also I'm mad at myself for being there and being so casual about it. You know what I mean? And the funny thing is, this last trip I was on was the least casual one I had been on, because I brought my husband with me, who is not Sudanese and who had never been to Sudan before. And so that was an excuse to do stuff that I had been putting off forever. I'd never gone to see the pyramids before this. And then, we had a tourist in our midst. So finally we were like, let's go. And it takes 2 seconds to get to the pyramids from Khartoum, but it was so casual for everyone that we were like, we'll get to it eventually, And so the fact that I was in my 30s by the time I went to see the pyramids for the first time, that have been right there for literally millennia. The fact that, we like took a little boat trip on the Nile. We went to Sabaloga. We saw like the Nile cataracts, a bunch of stuff. that I could have been doing the whole time. But again, it was so casual. It was, I grew up in DC and never went to go see the monuments because I was like, they will always be around. So it like, in a way, the timing is really intense to have gotten to see so much of the country for the first time less than 2 months before that would then become impossible, you know? And even like, yeah, I don't know. I so often think of myself as, you know, like, woe is me, diaspora poet, but like as being gone or away or severed in some way. And just even like, you know, there was a part on the way to the pyramids where we stopped to look at some temples. And the thing about all of this historical stuff in Sudan is there's no real tourism industry built around this. So you could literally go, you could touch the pyramid. You could probably go inside if you wanted to. And so on the way to the pyramids, we stop at a bunch of ruins of temples that have been there forever. And even in just looking at the carvings of figures on the temples, obviously there's like carvings of deities and stuff, and also just of regular people. And just to look at those carvings and be like, damn, that looks like me. And to be so immediately and dramatically contextualized is not a way that I'm used to thinking of myself. I'm used to thinking of myself as being Sudanese, but I think I forget to think of myself as being Sudanese, like all the way back to before it was called that, you know? And so to have accumulated so much context and lineage and history, and like, just as I was trying to figure out what am I going to do with all of this new context, to have that be gone is, I don't know, it's weird, it's sad, it's annoying, I have no words.
Yeah. And that sentence you said about like, I didn't know, how dare I not know better, you know? I think, you know, even this fixation on the dress or the book, it's really, it may not be just these intimate objects on their own, but also this first, like, knowing in your guts that you should have known better and that you silenced that voice, you know. But at the same time, the fact that, you know, you're denied the dream of return, you know, it's like this object expresses that, you know, of like that possibility. So and yeah, I don't know. I could say more about this, and I had a similar experience, even though the place where I grew up and my family still lives in is not at war, but I'm not allowed to enter it for political reasons, you know. So I know that these objects are in a safe place, but I feel like yeah, like I am shut away from them rather than, right, like and just like this idea of like I can't even fantasize about the return. Like there were times that I was able to fantasize, you know. So thank you, Safia. I know there are questions coming in the Q&A, but really this conversation is going well. I don't want to break the rhythm, and I have 2 more questions for Zeina and Mosab. You know, going back to you know, Zeina, what you were saying about like coming to exile, but also the fact that you are someone who lived in several countries, in Lebanon and Dubai, and now in the US, maybe other places too, and written poems in these different relocations at different points of your life, and you know, right, like different I guess the growth, the concerns, right? So and I'm just wondering, like across these proximities and distances, how do you see your poem changing, you know, or interrupting, even being interrupted by these relocations? And I think maybe the point you raised about language, choice of language, is one manifestation of this.
Yeah. I think, you know, I can try to, I think the hope is, whether we physically, geographically move or not, the hope is that constantly as poets, our poetics are shifting and changing and growing, while also realizing like there's no trajectory, like there's no clean trajectory. And I do feel like the poetry shifts, but I also simultaneously feel that I return to my obsessions and keep writing into my obsessions. Like when I was writing I was thinking, this is a quieter book, which it is. It is a quieter, more inward-looking book than like the previous books I had written. I was like, and I'm not going to write overtly politically about Lebanon and Beirut because, yes. And then August 4, 2020 happened. And you're like, there you go. No, it's impossible for us. It's impossible for us not to be writing about this shit because we come from places that are constantly being wounded. How can you just like not decide not to write about you can't, it's impossible. And so I've given up to a certain extent to my obsessions. And that's so I wanted to emphasize that there's actually repetition. And you were speaking about repetition right earlier. There's repetition and there's also variation within this repetition, right? As the shifts kind of happen. And I think one of my obsessions thematically is the theme of departure and return, or rather the departure and the impossibility of return. Because even when you can return, say I can, physically go to Lebanon now, right? It's fine. You're returning to a place that has changed, and you're returning changed. You yourself are also changed. So there's always a loss in the return. There's never really a return within the return. It's kind of like, no, if that makes sense. And maybe that's why, like in poetry, the ghazal form appeals to me so much, because the ghazal is like written in couplets and there's no narrative unity. Right? So you can depart, as you can be talking about God in one couplet and then your printer in the other couplet, right? But you can depart as much as you want, as long as you return by the end of the couplet to the rhyme and to the refrain. But you have to return to them differently. And that's the joy that the audience feels like, you've given us this refrain now, but differently. So I guess that's why I'm segueing now into like, thank you for coming to my TED Talk on the ghazal. But yeah, and also the sonnet and the palindrome form. It's like, it's repeating, but it's not really repeating, right? So yeah, I think the movement, the geographical movement, teaches you as a poet to keep shifting. It teaches you to resist endings. It teaches you to resist clean endings, right? It teaches you to resist singular meaning, expectations. I never, ever, ever expected I would be in California, ever. And then life is like, hello. So you're like, okay. So it teaches you that. It teaches you to defamiliarize. It teaches you to be surprised, I guess, for the lack of a better word. So yeah.
Thank you, Zeina. I want to return to Mosab and this thing about the intimate objects. Every time you post about like your library, and you also mentioned them in your essays, it really resonates with me. I am like, my father in the Gulf War, he had to sell his library just because there was no work. People needed money. And he's lucky that he has been able to rebuild this his library. But growing up, and I don't remember that incident, I was too young, but growing up, I always hear him talk about like the old library. I had a book in that old library that is like this edition, and the cover is this, So, and even if he had so many of the titles, he had the urge to buy them again. It still felt like these titles from the old library are different from this library, and this just makes me realize, like, from your writings about your library, and how you detailed carrying them from different continents, and through different friends, through different networks, is that these objects are not just really about yeah, like the material value of them, you know, it's like it's the hours, relationships, the times you spent with them, and so on. So if I may intrude here and just read a poem that I wrote about like the library, and then pass it to you, you know, to tell us about yours. In this poem I wrote in Arabic, and Sarah Kamel translated into English, but I really just want to read it in Arabic. المكتبة الوطنية. أحكي لأخوتي عن أيام الجمعة التي قضيناها نشيد مكتبة البيت للمرة الثانية، بعدما اضطررت إلى بيع نصفها من أجل حليب لأطفالك. لم تفسر من ذا الذي اشترى كتبك خلال الحرب، كيف وجدته، وكيف كان واثقا بأن الحرب ستنتهي والأدب يستمر. تحكي كأنهم لم يسمعوك، تكرر القصة وفي عينيك تلتمع مشاعر ملتبسة من الفخر والخجل. يخطر لك في كل مرة عنوان من مكتبتك القديمة، أين اشتريته وشكل غلافه، وكيف أنه من الطبعة الأولى التي بمجرد أن فقدتها فقدتها العرب معك. هي ليست بحكاية بل ذكرى تنفرط من فمك كمسبحة لم يبق منها سوى الخيط. الكتب التي اشتريتها وأخرى سرقناها نكاية بصاحب المكتبة أو كفعل مقاومة في سبيل مشاعية المعرفة. تقول مكتبتنا، ثم توصد الباب وتجلس معها وحدك، تنظر إلى الرفوف التي رتبتها مع أطفالك الشغيلة وتفكر الله العالم. في مواسم الكساد المعرفي يجن جنونك، فتقرر أن تصنيف المكتبة حسب المؤلف خطأ فادح. تستدعي طاقم العائلة إلى عملية فرز جديدة. الجنس العنوان فالمؤلف. تصدر قرارك كأنك في مكتبة وطنية يديرها رجل بدون. كانت حملات الترديب الشعواء هذه هي التي شكلت صداقتنا، على الرغم من أن الأبوة قاسية بطبعها، وعلى الرغم من جندري الذي توقعت أن أخفي شؤونه عنك. أحكي لهم أنك اشتريت نسخة جديدة من الأمير الصغير لكل واحد منهم. أظن أنه استفاد من هجرة الطيور ليفر. أحيانا أحس أنهم يغارون من صداقتنا، الأفكار الكبرى التي نمررها على طاولة الطعام، والنميمة الأدبية التي تختار منها ما يليق بعمري. ينسون كيف كنت تغضب إن وجدت أثرا لي في صفحة، والمرات التي تسببت كتبك المكعبة بكدمة لي حين تبادلتها وأمي كنيران صديقة. وكيف إن تخاصمنا تقول مكتبتي، تذكرني بأنك رأس المال الإقطاعي، وأني لست حتى شجرة تأتي منها الصفحات، ولا عامل يؤلف أو يرسم. يغارون من ذاكرتنا المشتركة، قصة دخول كل كتاب إلى بيتنا، وينسون كيف بعدما رحلت عنكم بعت مكتبتنا قصة قصة، وجلست تنظر إلى الرفوف الخاوية. الله العالم، ثم لم تشيدها ثالثة. I'm sorry for the long break, but I just wanted to say that the detail of the books is central in your chronicles, and it appears repeatedly and plays multiple roles in your workings of self and memory. In them, I don't only see intimate objects, but the years and travels and friends and jobs that made their entry to your house possible. I want to hear about your library. What are some of your dearest books to you, and what were your rituals in their company?
Thank you, Mona, for reading your beautiful poem about the family and the library and the intimate fights. I don't know, but I want to comment on what you said about what Safia said, what Zeina also said, because there are many things that are bringing some memories into my head when everyone said their parts. So as you mentioned, a lot of the books in my home library are books that I brought with me when I returned to Gaza from my 3 trips to the United States. The first time I returned from the US, I brought about 120 books with me. And everyone in the airport thought I was smuggling books. But I told them, I mean, I had to lie. I told them, oh, I'm studying. I showed them my university ID. You know, I'm a student and I'm taking a break and I'm going to read and study these books at home. The second time I returned was 2 years ago. I brought 70 books with me. And the last time I returned to Gaza was 10 days before October 7th. And I brought with me 20 books. These are some of the books that I left with a friend in the hope that when I returned to the US, I would take them from him to Gaza. So it's interesting to hear about the story of, I think it was your grandfather who sold the books during the Gulf War to buy some milk and food for the family. I mean, the question is, I mean, who is that person who bought the books, and whether he had some hope that he would be reading the books sometime in the future? I mean, it was a very hopeful act, buying the books in the first place. So a lot of the books that I had on my shelves had signature of author friends. I can name Stephen Greenblatt, the Shakespearean scholar who teaches at Harvard, Askold Melnichek, poets like Katha Pollitt and Naomi Shihab Nye, and Amiel Alkalai. So I mean, I would hold these books very dear to my heart in the library. I remember also that a few days before the October 7th happened, it was the first time for me to rearrange the books on my shelves. And I think that was maybe a mistake, a cosmological mistake I did, because when I rearranged the books on my shelf, something dangerous happened in the world, and I posted something warning the people around the world against rearranging the books on their shelves. And I hope many of you are listening and adhering my warning. And Zeina, you mentioned something about, you know, the return. I mean, the departure and return. I think what Israel is doing in Gaza is that they are destroying not only houses but also schools and hospitals and ancient sites and mosques and churches, because the Israelis do not want us to return, even if we returned. So people are now divided into two parts in Gaza. Some people are in South Gaza, and the others are in North Gaza. I have two siblings who left North Gaza 3 months ago, and they are unable to return and reunite with my parents and the other siblings. So they are separated from each other. So what Israel is doing is destroying everything. So even if people return, those who left the north, if they are going to return, they are not going to find their houses, and even if they return, they will not find whatever reminds them of what Gaza was. So if you are going to the market, you will have no memory of the market. If you are going to the mosque, there is no mosque. If you are going to your school, you know, there is no school. There is no university. There are no clinics, no hospitals. So they are making it impossible for people to return. I mean, in case some of them are still alive, even if those who would be still alive, if they return to the places where they used to live, it will never remind them of this place when it was, to some extent, a normal place for them to live. And Mahmoud Darwish said, if they return the cafe to you, who would bring back the comrades and the friends that you used to sit with? And if I'm going to get the same books that I used to have in my home, they are not the same books, because these books did not have the same journey with me before I put them on the shelves. And also, Safia, you mentioned something about your grandfather, I think, putting the books on the window to protect him or the family from the bullets. And people, they are shooting the books. Oh goodness, this is very wrong. Okay, and I remember that because we are being starved by the Israeli occupation, I wish that the books on my shelves could be eaten. I wish that and instead of putting some books on my shelves, I wished I had put some food instead of the books. So my family, even after our house was bombed in October, my family would return and remove some of the rubble and find some food instead of some paper and some covers, you know. And even if people are going to eat the books, even if these books are edible, people are, oh, they are eating books. Oh, this is very wrong. So whether the books are being shot, you know, or are being eaten, it wouldn't be taken as, you know, as a good thing, because this West is hypocrite. Yeah, so there are many things that we lost in Gaza. I'm in one of my poems. It's called One Art, which no art. It's written after Elizabeth Bishop. No art. I said that I lost 3 friends to war, language to fear, and a city to darkness. I lost many things, but I lost the 3 friends to war, a city, a language to fear, the Arabic language, and a city to darkness. And Gaza has been dark, not because there is electricity for only maybe 5 or 6 hours in the summer and sometimes 2 hours in winter, but because it's only lit at night by the Israeli bombs. This is the only way we sometimes can see that the faces of other people around us. Yeah, so it's a big loss. And even not only did I lose my home library, but also I lost the copies of my first poetry book. I had about 20 original copies of my poetry book. You know, as part of my contract with the publisher, I got 25 copies. I gave one to Rifat Al-Arair, God bless his soul, and some other copies to close friends. And I had still 20 copies on my shelves. And I also had the chance of printing a local copy after I got the permission from my publisher. I printed about 150 copies in Gaza, a local copy, in the hope of arranging a book launch in Gaza, a signing event. And I was hoping that Rifat said he would be honored to introduce me to the audience, you know, in Gaza. You know, so in the bombardment of our house, I lost all the copies of my books, including my own book. And I left Gaza with only one copy of my book, the copy that traveled with me during my readings at NYU, at some bookstores, you know, in DC and Philadelphia and many other, and Los Angeles and San Francisco. So I only got out from Gaza with one copy of my book. As for the rest of the books, they are still under the rubble. Sometimes my younger brother, who is still in North Gaza, sometimes he is. I posted a video on Instagram of my mother and my brother-in-law and my younger brother, trying to scour through the rubble for some food. You know, my mother said, "Oh, there used to be some bottles of olives here, or some wheat flour." And instead of them finding some food, they were finding only books. So it was a funny video to me, but it tells us many things, that they are not bombing walls, or, you know, they are bombing books.
Thank you, Mosab. Thank you for, you know, this mapping. You know, you map to us like the memory, the lives, the peoples that, like, your library was like the central point of, you know, and you did that beautifully. And you know, I don't know, this reminds us also of all the tens and hundreds of poets and writers and translators and intellectuals who've been murdered, you know, over the past 6 months. You know, this is a genocide in every way, you know, against the people, against the infrastructure, against their memory. And what I hear from you is like not only the loss is multiple, but also the impossible returns are multiple. You know, they're going to be impossible, not to be pessimistic or defeatist, but, you know, they're going to be impossible in many ways to retrieve that life before. So thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you all to the panelists. I want to pass this to Salma and Noreen for the Q&A. We have a few Q&A from the audience.
In regards to, we're so close, we need to end up because of the time, but thank you so much for this wonderful presentation on this important intersection of topics. Thank you, Safia, Zeina, Mosab, and MENA, and thank you everyone for watching. And I apologize, we're gonna have to cut this short because of the time.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Please take care.
Bye.
Okay, it was great being in conversation. Zeina, Safia, Mona, thank you so much, MENA Club.
Thank you, Mosab.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to be in your company.
Thank you.
Yalla, مع السلامة. Peace and